At 2:17 a.m., the morgue felt like it existed outside of time itself. The lights were too bright for an hour when most of the hospital slept, and the air carried that familiar metallic chill that always clung to the walls down here. I remember the hum of the ventilation system, the soft ticking of the clock on the far wall, and the thin ribbon of condensation forming on the freezer doors behind me. It should have been just another quiet night shift, one of many I had already endured as a young forensic pathologist, still learning how to settle my nerves in places built entirely around the aftermath of life. I had done enough post-mortem exams by then to understand the comforting predictability of the work. The silence was absolute. The stillness was reliable. The dead do not argue or cry or demand anything of you. They simply wait. And on that night, waiting on the metal table beneath the harsh fluorescent lights, was a man labeled only as John Doe number 47, a temporary name for someone whose story had ended before we even learned who he was. I began the examination the same way I always did, quietly, methodically, letting my mind settle into the structure of the process. I noted the markings, the lividity, the basic identifiers. Everything seemed straightforward. Nothing felt unusual. The world felt stable. Then I turned away. It couldn't have been for more than a few seconds, just long enough to reach for a pair of forceps from the tray behind me. And in that sliver of time, something happened that shattered every assumption I had walked into that room with. The first sound was soft, almost indistinguishable, a faint metallic clatter that made me freeze mid-step. I turned back slowly, expecting to see that I'd accidentally nudged a tool or bumped a table. Instead, what I saw made my heart slam into my ribs. The man's right shoulder had shifted, just slightly but unmistakably. A slow, unnatural rise, as if something inside him had tightened and pulled upward. I stared, breath caught in my throat, too stunned to move. Bodies can twitch after death. Every doctor knows that. Muscles fire, nerves misfire, enzymes break down and release tiny electric sparks. But this was different. This was not a random spasm. This looked deliberate. Before I could convince myself I was imagining it, his hand twitched. Not a flicker, not a tremor, a real movement, fingers curling inward, like a slow, hesitant grasp reaching for something that wasn't there. The tray beside him rattled. A scalpel rolled off the edge and hit the floor with a sharp, echoing clang. My pulse hammered in my ears. For a moment, I genuinely wondered whether I was still awake, whether the exhaustion of too many night shifts had finally caught up with me. I forced myself to take a breath, then another, grounding myself in the cold tile beneath my feet, in the reality of the room around me. I stepped closer, cautiously, half convinced the body would move again the moment I blinked. But it didn't. John Doe number 47 lay perfectly still, pale and motionless, the way he should have been all along. Yet my instinct screamed that what I'd witnessed wasn't normal. It wasn't the typical post-mortem reflex every medical student is warned about. There was a heaviness in the air now, a pressure that hadn't been there minutes before, as if the room itself knew something I didn't. And as I stood over him, staring at the stillness that had returned too quickly, one thought cut through the fog of disbelief. I had seen bodies twitch before, but this wasn't random muscle firing. It felt like he was reacting to me. The dread that crawled up my spine in that moment never fully left me, and I didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning of the night that would follow me for the rest of my career. Long before he became John Doe number 47 on a metal table in the quiet hours of the night, he was a man with a name, a history, and people who cared about him. It would be days before we learned his identity, but when we finally did, checked my own hands, half expecting to see tremors betraying my nerves. But they were steady. The only instability was inside me. As I continued the exam, I told myself I needed a second opinion, not because I doubted my skills, but because I needed someone else to witness how wrong this felt. I called for Dr. Hall, a senior pathologist known for his no-nonsense attitude and unwavering logic. If anyone could ground this situation, it was him. By the time he arrived, the atmosphere seemed to shift. The room felt colder, hollow. And there Benjamin lay, still, lifeless, completely ordinary. No tension in the hands, no warmth in the chest, nothing that resembled what I'd felt moments before. Dr. Hall looked over the body with a practiced eye, his expression unreadable. After a brief exam, he turned to me with a small shrug. "Post-mortem spasms," he said, dismissing the concern with the kind of certainty only experience can build. "Happens sometimes. Don't let it shake you." I wanted to argue. I wanted to explain everything. The warmth, the resistance, the way it felt like Benjamin had reacted to my touch. But the words knotted in my throat. I didn't want to sound irrational. I didn't want to sound afraid. So I nodded, and he left the room without another word. The door clicked shut behind him, and the silence settled in again, heavy, suffocating. I reached for my pen and began documenting the findings, my hand trembling slightly as I wrote. As the ink scratched across the paper, one thought wouldn't leave me alone. What I had seen, what I had felt, it wasn't normal. And the worst part was knowing that whatever explanation existed wasn't something any textbook had ever prepared me for. I stood alone in the autopsy room again, trying to steady my breathing as the echo of Dr. Hall's footsteps faded down the hallway. His dismissal should have reassured me. It should have grounded the moment back into the realm of science, routine, and predictable physiology. But instead, it left me feeling even more isolated, like I was the only one aware that something in this room wasn't obeying the rules it was supposed to. I turned back to Benjamin's body. He lay motionless on the metal table, the overhead lights casting sharp reflections across his skin. I reminded myself of the process, of the steps I needed to follow, and of the responsibility I had toward the truth, whatever that truth might be. I reached for the oscillating saw, preparing to open the thoracic cavity, a task I had performed dozens of times without hesitation. But the moment the blade hummed to life, something happened that tore the fragile calm clean in half. Benjamin's entire body jolted. Not a twitch, not a spasm, but a violent, full-bodied convulsion that sent the instruments beside him clattering to the floor. The force of it made the table shudder beneath him. My breath punched out of me in a gasp, and instinctively I stumbled backward, nearly dropping the saw. For a second, the room felt unreal, like the air around me had thickened, vibrating with a tension I couldn't name. I froze, staring at him, waiting for the motion to stop. And when it did, the stillness that followed was far worse than the movement. Then, his eyes opened. Not fully, just enough for the lids to retract a sliver, revealing the whites beneath. No pupils, no focus, just a silent, horrifying suggestion of awareness. And in that fraction of a second, it felt like the entire room tilted sideways. My heart thrashed in my chest. After Dr. Hall left, I went back to the autopsy room, determined to face it again. This time, not as a frightened newcomer, but as a scientist searching for clarity. I half expected some lingering trace to justify the movement, a loose joint, an air pocket, anything mechanical. But as soon as I pulled back the sheet covering Benjamin's face, every thought in my mind dissolved. His expression had changed. Not dramatically, just subtly enough that I questioned whether the overhead lights were playing tricks on me. The muscles in his face looked less slack, his jaw seemed slightly more closed, and there was a faint crease between his brows, like the early echo of concern, or awareness. That was the moment I realized I wasn't searching for a scientific explanation anymore. I was searching for permission to believe the truth. Permission to acknowledge that what was happening in that morgue wasn't biological. It was something else entirely. I should have turned around and walked out. Any rational person would have, but something deeper, curiosity, duty, maybe even fear, kept me rooted to the floor of that autopsy room as I stared at Benjamin's subtly altered expression. The sheet crumpled slightly in my hands as I forced myself closer. I studied every contour of his face, searching for a reasonable explanation. The human brain is wired to see patterns, to find meaning even where none exists. I wanted that to be the case. I needed it. But it didn't feel like a trick of the light. It felt deliberate. I stepped back and tried to steady my breathing. The overhead ventilation hummed softly. My gloves crinkled as I lifted my hands, unsure of what I was about to do. Then I spoke aloud, quietly, more to myself than to the body on the table. "Benjamin, what happened to you?" The sound of my own voice startled me. It felt wrong speaking to someone who couldn't answer. But almost immediately after the words left my mouth, the temperature in the room shifted. Not dramatically, just enough that the small hairs on my arms rose beneath my sleeves. A subtle coldness spread from the metal table outward, touching the air like a slow exhale from some unseen place. Then an object moved. A single stainless steel clamp resting near Benjamin's left hand slid an inch across the tray. Not violently, not theatrically, just a soft, controlled glide, as if nudged by an invisible fingertip. My heart lurched into my throat. I stepped backwards so quickly I nearly stumbled, but my eyes never left that clamp. And Benjamin's hand. His fingers had shifted, only slightly, but enough that the clamp's movement suddenly made sense in the most horrifying way. He had touched it, or something through him had. I pressed my back against the far counter, gripping the edge until my knuckles ached. I scanned the room for any possible cause: air pressure changes, equipment vibration, gravitational slippage. Nothing fit. Nothing even came close. "Benjamin," I whispered again, though I had no idea why. If you're trying to communicate." Before I could finish, a faint sound emerged. Not from the ventilation, not from the hallway. From the table. A soft, rhythmic tapping. 2 taps. A pause. Then 3 taps. Another pause. Finally, one single tap, louder than the rest. 2, 3, 1. A pattern. Intentional. My breath turned shallow. I didn't know Morse code well enough to decipher anything in the moment, but something inside me understood the meaning wasn't encoded in the taps. It was in the act itself. He was answering. Or someone was. I moved closer again, trembling, unwilling but unable to stop myself. The air around the body felt charged, almost electrical, prickling against my skin. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but a stronger instinct, a need for truth, for understanding, held me in place. As I reached the side of the table, the tapping ceased. The room fell into complete silence. I leaned in, inches from Benjamin's face, trying to detect any lingering motion, any sign that another impossible event was about to unfold. And that's when it happened. The faintest whisper brushed against my left ear, so soft I couldn't tell if it came from across the room. I had misinterpreted what I saw, if stress or exhaustion had blurred the line between perception and reality. I wanted to believe that. I tried to. But every attempt to frame the events within logical boundaries unraveled the moment I recalled the whisper. That single word, listen, spoke with a clarity and intention that no muscle spasm or auditory hallucination could adequately explain. Still, I told no one. How could I? In a field defined by evidence, reproducibility, and meticulous documentation, who would believe that a dead man had communicated with me? Colleagues spoke often about unusual cases, rare infections, anomalous injuries, inexplicable tissue reactions, but never anything like this. So I buried the memory beneath layers of professionalism. I continued my work, completed my fellowship, accepted promotions, and built a reputation as methodical, calm, and grounded. Yet the truth lingered just beneath the surface, waiting. The nightmares began quietly. At first, they were fragmented. Echoes of metallic tapping, glimpses of a dimly lit morgue, a feeling of being watched by eyes that should not have been capable of opening. Then they evolved. In one recurring dream, I stood in the hallway outside the autopsy suite, the same hallway where I'd once heard Benjamin's voice call my name. The walls stretched endlessly in both directions, the lights flickering in a slow, deliberate rhythm. And somewhere beyond the reach of the dim glow, I heard footsteps that didn't belong to any living person. They moved closer each night. Despite the fear, I never sensed malice in those dreams, only a profound grief, as if someone were desperately trying to reach across an impossible divide. Eventually, I realized I couldn't run from the truth anymore. After years of silence, I reached out to Benjamin's sister. Not to share every detail, I didn't want to burden her with the grotesque specifics, but to tell her that something in him stirred near the end, that he wasn't entirely alone, that the flicker of life, or consciousness, or whatever we choose to call it, had not vanished quietly. She listened without interruption. When I finished, she didn't recoil or question my sanity. Instead, she smiled with a softness that caught me off guard. She said Benjamin always believed that the end of life wasn't a barrier. It was a doorway, one we simply couldn't see until we crossed it ourselves. She thanked me for giving her a kind of closure she hadn't expected, a reassurance that her brother hadn't simply drifted away into nothingness. I think about her words often. I think about Benjamin even more. In all the years since, I've never encountered another case like his. No other body has shifted beneath my hands. No other whisper has threaded its way through the sterile quiet of the morgue. But the memory remains, unwavering and unresolved. Sometimes, late at night, long after I've completed my final examination and locked the doors behind me, I pause before leaving. I let the silence settle. I wait, just for a moment, to see if I might hear that tapping again, or feel that electric stillness that once filled the room. It never comes. But the absence doesn't comfort me. It only deepens the mystery. Did Benjamin's mind flare awake in some final desperate attempt to communicate? Or did I witness something far beyond medical understanding? Something that defies every rule we trust to define the boundary between life and death? I still don't know. And maybe I never will. But some cases stay with you. They settle in the spaces you can't quite reach, the ones you don't speak about but never forget. This one still follows me. Would you like anything revised or expanded?